and this video series is all about a big thing in my life that a lot of you have been asking me about for quite some time. My tumor. So fun. So I guess what I want to do with this is start from the beginning with symptoms and when they started. Now, the tumor that I had was a Pheochromocytoma, which is an adrenal tumor that is comprised of chromaffin tissue. So because it's made of chromaffin tissue, it secretes adrenaline the same way your adrenal glands do, and it also encourages your adrenal glands to then excrete more. So you end up with all these hormones in your system. Catecholamines, metanephrines can wreak havoc on your health and just kind of make you feel crazy, basically. The earliest that I can remember symptoms starting was when I was about 7 years old. One of the symptoms of the tumor that I had is a sense of impending doom. Right, that's a great one. So I used to lie awake at night and think about death. I would always have a terrible stomach ache before bed. I would have to spend a lot of time with my mom before bed just trying to relax and calm down to be able to sleep. It was really, really hard on me. Another thing I remember experiencing that can also be a symptom is tinnitus. So when you get that ringing in your ear, it's like your ear turns off and you just hear a ringing. And I remember I must have been about 7 years old, and my dad was on a business trip, and I was on the phone with him, and I said, "Are you on an airplane?" Because I could hear that ringing in my ear, and I thought that it was the sound of an airplane, when it's getting ready to taxi out and you have all those machinery noises. I also remember being about 7 years old and saying to my mom, "I feel like there's water under my skin and it's boiling." And that would be the hot flashes. So hot flashes are another symptom. They were pretty consistent. I'd say at that age I was having them at least once a week, and this is just not something that they look for. At the time when I got diagnosed, all of the medical research and literature that I could find said that 80% of these tumors are diagnosed post-mortem. So 80% of them were diagnosed in autopsies, basically, not in living patients. And there were about 2.5 diagnosed in the United States every year. Another reason they probably didn't look for them in me is because they're very uncommon in children. So I'm just going to give you a timeline of my symptoms, and I actually wrote down some of them. After the anxiety sort of picked up, I ended up falling into very, very deep depression. I started having suicidal ideations around 12 years old, and it wasn't that I wanted to die necessarily, it's that I would fantasize about killing myself. That started around age 12, and for the most part, no, I didn't really want to die. For the majority of those years, I didn't actually want to hurt myself, I didn't want to kill myself. It was just having this voice in the back of my head that would be feeding me this information, and I couldn't shut it out. It was just constantly there, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was still able to stay active in my life and my activities, but it was a constant struggle with myself to just get out the door every day. There would be people that I wanted to see and wanted to spend time with, but this anxiety was so overpowering that it took everything I had to not cancel on absolutely every social engagement that I had. I'm really amazed that I was able to suck it up for so long. Sometimes it's not just changing your thinking. Sometimes there are things really wrong in your body and your body's chemistry, and if you need a medication to produce a synthetic form of a hormone that other people's bodies produce naturally, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing at all wrong with that, because everyone's bodies need those hormones, or they need less of a certain hormone, they need more of a hormone to counteract their body producing too much of a certain hormone. So if your hormones are out of whack and that's why you have depression or anxiety, don't feel bad about it, because everybody's brains and bodies need those hormones. And sometimes your body just doesn't have them in the right quantities. And if you need to take a medication to get your brain the right quantities, do it. I constantly had stomach aches before bed. So this tumor wreaked havoc on my digestive system. I think the first time they suspected I had an ulcer, or I had symptoms of an ulcer, was when I was about 12 years old. Eventually, I went to a gastroenterologist when I was 18. They did an endoscopy, and they saw a tumor in my stomach, but they took a biopsy and there was nothing to it. It was just like the cells were going crazy. They saw a couple other ulcers in there, like more than one ulcer in my stomach. It was ridiculous. And then eventually I puked up that tumor one day. The amount of adrenaline that I had in my system was kind of like someone who was being terrorized. And when your body's under that much stress constantly, it really screws up your stomach. So if you've ever been like really stressed out or emotionally just in a really terrible place and you've had stomach problems from that, that kind of gives you an idea of like what I was experiencing. The tumor was depleting my system so badly that I ended up with a really weak immune system. I would catch every single virus that came around, every cold, everything. I was sick at least once a month. I would get strep throat like twice a year. I would catch absolutely everything. My tonsils were constantly inflamed to the point where my immune system had gotten so bad that my tonsils sort of turned on me and they started hoarding infections instead of cleaning out infections. So I constantly had like these big pustules on the backs of my tonsils and they would like fall out and I'd have to spit them out. It was absolutely disgusting. At the time, I was like, okay, we figured out that my tonsils are poisoning me and I'm gonna get better after this surgery and life is gonna be great. And I felt a lot better, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. I basically had to go to my primary care physician, have her refer me to an otolaryngologist, lie to the otolaryngologist and say that my primary wanted my tonsils taken out, then go back to my primary and say my otolaryngologist wanted my tonsils taken out, even though they were like, let's try these medications and we'll see. So I had to lie to all these different doctors. I ended up going to another otolaryngologist, telling them that the other two wanted my tonsils taken out, but they wanted a second opinion, and that was the one who approved the surgery. So I had to lie to all my doctors because they wouldn't do what I said. Nobody listens to me. So I had my tonsils taken out. That was fantastic, and that surgery actually was super fast and it went really well, so I didn't have any kind of anesthesia awareness problem being like awake during surgery. It was super speedy, went off without a hitch. Little did I know the tumor that I had at the time could have killed me when it reacted with the anesthesia, so I'm very lucky that that didn't happen. I can't remember if I was 16 or 17 at that point. So I had my tonsils taken out and then I started doing allergy shot therapy because my immune system was so terrible that I had become allergic to literally everything. Most dermatologists will do like a topical allergy test where they will draw a graph on your back or on your arm and the graph will correspond to these tinctures that they're gonna stab you with in these needles, and then based on how your skin reacts to the allergens, they can tell what you're more allergic to or not allergic to. The nurse did the test, she pricked me with each needle in each square corresponding to the chart, and she left for a few minutes and then she came back in and she screamed because all of the welts on my back, I reacted to absolutely every single thing that they had tested me for, and the welts were so big that they were spilling out of their graph area and into the other graph areas, so my entire back was just massive welts, like that big. I was really proactive with my health because I had been sick most of my childhood and all of my teens, and I just wanted to get better so desperately that I was willing to try all this crazy stuff. I went to as many specialists as I could. I kept pestering my primary care physician. She kept saying, well, I think it's psychosomatic, which is basically her saying, you're making it up, it's all in your head, maybe we should send you to another therapist. So I don't begrudge my parents for this because they trust their doctor. They trust that their doctor knows what's best, and my parents sort of, went along with it and were like trying to get me the mental health care that I needed to get over this because, other than the allergies and the tonsils, they thought that everything else was also kind of like a psychosomatic thing, and your mind is so powerful that if you imagine that you're sick, you can physically make yourself sick. So I don't blame them. I don't blame my doctor whatsoever for thinking these things because the tumor that I had is really not common in children at all. It's usually, I think, in like 40 to 60-year-old patients, and it's not something that kids usually have. Plus, it's just really rare in general. You know, I did the allergy shot therapy, and that improved my allergies immensely. And I kind of thought that the allergies were the result of my tonsils having made me sick. So I was like, okay, so I took care of my tonsils, I'm gonna take care of my allergies, I'm gonna take my allergy medication, I'm going to treat the asthma that resulted from me being allergic to so many things, and I'm gonna get better. And I constantly believed that I was gonna get better. I believed that I had found the answer every single time, and this was gonna be it, and I was finally gonna have the life that I wanted to have, and I just kept getting sicker. The depression and anxiety just kept getting worse and worse. The stomach symptoms kept getting worse. Over the course of several years, I think 5 or 6 years, I ended up being on pretty much every single psychotropic medication or combination thereof that was available on the market. Everything. Anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants, Abilify that supposedly helps those medications work better, a combination of an anti-seizure medication and an antipsychotic that together actually help the anxiety and depression. I had been on everything, and I had tried so hard, and I had been so diligent, and I just couldn't understand why I wasn't getting better. So I think when I was about 17, for the first time, my upper lip swelled up, and it wasn't like a herpes or a cold sore kind of thing, which, by the way, like, most of the population has herpes. Like, whether or not they know it, most of the population has it. So I went to my doctor, they would like swab my lip, they'd culture it, none of that kind of stuff. The middle of my upper lip would swell up, and it felt like there was a marble in the middle of it. It would get huge, just out of nowhere, and it seemed like it could be an allergic reaction, but then it wouldn't respond to Benadryl, it wouldn't respond to steroids, it wouldn't respond to creams of any kind. It would just be massive and swollen for 3 or 4 days until it went down, and it just came out of nowhere, it seemed. Turns out it would pop up when I was more stressed. There were times when it would swell up so big and so quickly that my lip would split open. It wasn't like a cold sore, so they couldn't figure out why that was happening. I would just have a big, huge cut in the middle of my lip. Very pretty. And I'd say from age 15 on, until they took out the tumor, I could seriously go to bed, sleep for 12 hours, get up, eat something, go pee, and go back to bed for another 12 hours. I was so tired all the freaking time. I was tired, I was exhausted. They thought, oh, well, it's the depression, so we'll alter your meds and see if that helps. And I would be on like an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication that would work for a while, and then they would all taper off. So then I'd have to up my dose. And then when you're dealing with those medications, you also have side effects from those freaking medications, and those screw with you as well. Throughout my late teens and my early 20s, I had been treated for kidney failure 3 different times. 3 different times I had been hospitalized. They would treat me by giving me a massive amount of fluids. They had done ultrasounds of my kidneys and somehow had not seen this tumor on top of my right kidney. I don't know how. Maybe it's because they didn't have contrast to light up the kidney. I don't know, but they missed it. So I had been having like a lot of intermittent kidney pain, late teens, early 20s, and then that got really bad around the beginning of 2011. So I started getting stabbing kidney pain almost all the time. It was absolutely excruciating. So I got my period when I was 11, and I would bleed so much that I became anemic. I would wake up because I was literally screaming in my sleep because I was in so much pain. And I had to go on birth control, I think when I was 16, because I started getting these ovarian cysts, and basically the follicles in your ovaries fill up with fluid or just gunk, and then the cysts would rupture, and I would be in so much pain that I would go into convulsions. Like, I would be lying on the floor involuntarily convulsing because I was in so much pain. There were a lot of nights when I woke up because I was screaming in my sleep. I was in so much pain, both from my period or from the ovarian cysts. It was just not workable. So I went on the pill when I was 16, and that helped. I would pretty consistently have ovarian cysts, but they weren't growing to the point where they would rupture. So my hormones were like definitely way out of whack. And I was able to control the anemia by not bleeding as much because I was on the pill, but then like, you know, the pill gives you all these different symptoms and all kinds of frustrating things happen from those hormones. So that was a whole other can of worms, and the birth control pill sucks. If you've ever been on it, you probably realize this. I started getting the headaches when I was about 10 years old, and my doctor couldn't figure out why I had migraines. She thought it was stress, because it was psychosomatic, because I was crazy. So I had these pounding headaches, and a lot of the time they would happen right before I would have hot flashes. So I'd have hot flashes, I'd have these pounding headaches where like I couldn't see, I couldn't hear, light would hurt. And sometimes they would last for hours, sometimes they would last for days. So they thought I had migraines. They didn't really treat them with anything. Yeah, I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. And they steadily worsened until my tumor was taken out. I started having the palpitations, so like it feels like your heart is kind of like skipping a beat, or you can feel it thumping really hard. I started having the palpitations, I think when I was about 21. One thing that didn't really make sense to anyone is I would eat a massive amount of food all the time and I wouldn't gain weight. I was just, I wasn't skinny, but I was thin. And this is actually a little bit baffling because it's sort of the opposite of the symptom that a lot of other people with this type of tumor have, and I think that's because a lot of people with this tumor have Cushing's syndrome, which I don't have. So a lot of patients with a pheo are massively overweight, and I didn't have that. I had the opposite problem. It actually made my thyroid gland hyperactive. So basically I would eat a ton of food and I wouldn't gain weight, and it was a little bit baffling to everyone. I mean, it was nice. I'd like to have that symptom again, but I don't. So once I got on the last combination of medications that I was on, which strangely it worked, my psychiatrist was like a really good pharmacologist, and he put me on an antipsychotic and an anti-seizure medication. I don't understand how that works, but it did. It was the only thing that really controlled the anxiety and depression to the point where I could function as an adult and get through my day-to-day life. So in late 2010, I think it was like November or December, I left my job. I was a full-time assistant store manager for Guess, and I liked my job. It was enjoyable, I was good at it, it was fun, but I kept getting sicker. And I started getting the hot flashes more frequently, and then I started having these episodes where I would be falling asleep. I could not keep my eyes open. I was constantly like napping through my whole lunch break, napping through my 15-minute breaks. I couldn't function at work anymore. I had a really long commute to work, so I thought maybe stress was a factor and I could cut out some stress. There were times when I would be driving and I would know that I was falling asleep and that I would have to pull over within 5 minutes to be safe. And then I would sleep on the side of the road for, I think the longest I slept was 3 hours, and I woke up and I was still tired. These types of things started happening and it got to be really scary. My allergies suddenly got worse and more varied. I was having to use my rescue inhaler for my asthma constantly. Like all these things just started to snowball. So I thought I needed to focus on my health. I thought maybe my job was literally killing me because it was a little bit stressful and the commute was really long and that was really stressful. I was getting a lot of work acting, and I thought I enjoy this a lot more. And it's physically strenuous, but it's not emotionally draining. So I thought maybe I'd pursue that part-time for a little while, get my health in order, focus on doctor's appointments, and go from there. So I left my job. I was able to keep my health insurance through a program called Cobra for about 2 months before I ran out of savings for it. So that was over $600 a month just to keep that health insurance through Cobra. And it didn't really get me that far. I went to all these doctors in a big push to like find the right specialists and figure out what was going on with my health, and I just like really focused on trying to get better. And then my health insurance ran out. So I was without insurance through the end of November and all of December. And then, thank God, the Affordable Care Act passed, because honestly, that's the only thing that saved my life. It was supposed to be active January 1st, but I couldn't get back in the system, so I wasn't seeing any doctors until May. End of April, beginning of May. And I was just kind of like hanging out, biding my time, trying not to go to the doctor, trying not to go to the ER. I had all kinds of symptoms that were suddenly escalating and getting worse. I had not had, this might be TMI for some people, I had not had a solid poop in about 4 years. I would have squishy, goopy, watery poops. I would randomly have diarrhea for no reason, like watery, painful diarrhea for no reason. So I had like changed my diet. I had tried all these different things. I had tried herbs. I had gone gluten-free for a while back when being gluten-free was like damn near impossible and there were no products on the market and gluten-free bread was absolutely disgusting. I had tried all of that. While I was having the diarrhea, I would be having like hot flashes, so I'd be pouring sweat. And I'm like, okay, I feel great. Around the beginning of 2011, I started getting these really intense mood swings, like super angry, like the freaking Hulk, out of nowhere. I would be so angry about things like, I remember we had this deep fryer and I picked it up and like the handle kind of tilted over and it pinched my finger and it cut me, and I was so immediately pissed that I just like threw it and smashed it into like 3 pieces. I was that on edge and that angry from my tumor symptoms all the time. So early 2011, I started getting the stabbing lower back pain and the stabbing abdominal pain really, really bad. I would be walking and then I would get these pains that were so intense that I could not walk. The headaches, the pounding headaches got more intense. Then I started being able to hear my blood. It's like I could hear my blood moving through my jugular. I could feel it pounding in my aorta, and it was so uncomfortable and it was disgusting. It's like around this time I started to just feel all of my guts. I could feel what was hurting and I could feel if something was swollen. It was gross. It was really gross. And then the palpitations got really bad. The palpitations got so bad that I would feel like my pulse was like this. And that was terrifying. You don't like to feel your heart stop beating. There was nothing I could do about it. It was like I would just be sitting there, relaxing, reading a book on the sofa, and suddenly I would get these palpitations. I could feel my blood moving. I would get hot flashes. I would get horrible anxiety, and I had no idea why. My hair started falling out in clumps. I developed this skin condition called pleva, which is, it's kind of like psoriasis or eczema. It's these little like mini goosebumps, and then they would develop into like flaky skin, and then that flaky skin would come off, and I just have like if you had a rash and you scratched it open, it was like that, which was charming and disgusting. And all the other symptoms that I had had my entire life suddenly got 10 times worse. Around this time, I started having less and less energy. The headaches got debilitating. The anxiety and depression were debilitating. I could not function. I called my mom one day and I said, I feel like something is draining the life force from me and poisoning me to death. And she was like, oh, sweetie, we'll pray about it, which I appreciate. Like, prayer is so important and prayer is so helpful. But I think like in the back of my parents' minds, it was still like, it was crazy talking. It was anxiety and depression and all that stuff. I appreciate their faith, and faith is so important to me, but I was talking with a family friend about it, and I said, I'm dying, and I don't know why, and the doctors can't find anything wrong with me, but I know there's something happening. And she said, you know deep down in your heart if something is really, really wrong, and you just need to go with your gut and keep doing what you're doing. And I'm so glad I did, because if I had taken the advice of the doctors I had been seeing, I'd be dead. Because I didn't listen to my doctors and I kept getting other opinions, that's the only reason I figured it out. So this was beginning of 2011, but the Affordable Care Act, made it possible for me to go back on my parents' health insurance. My parents had fantastic health insurance. They had a PPO plan, which is amazing. So I'm gonna wrap up this video here because that's sort of the end of all of the symptoms that I had my entire life, and the next part of this series is going to be all about my diagnosis and treatment. So thanks for watching this entire video thus far. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button below, hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button, and be sure to watch the next video in this series.